Today's Gemara in Yevamos Daf Hey. All the learning has been sponsored as an incredible Schos Ili Neshama for Rav Shlomo ben Rameir in conjunction with the release of our new Sefer Baruch Hashem, the laws of Chanukah and Purim. The learning of the entire Chabura, the learning of that Sefer should bring an incredible Aliyah Neshama to Rav Shlomo ben Rameir as he's oilet and higher place in Gan Eden Shal Ma'ila. Again, I welcome anyone who'd like to reach out with names for Refuah Shlema, names for Shaduchim, etc. Please just resend the emails. We're trying to revamp the list so that we're not repeating names that are not necessary. Now we pick it up on Dalid Amid Beis. We read yesterday, if you're looking in the page in front of you, to about 6 lines in the bottom, but I like to go up to about 12, 15 lines in the bottom. The first one line is Shanez Meha Allah Vitana Devei Rabbi Yishmael. Let's go back over there. We read through this last piece of Gemara extremely fast, and this will really take us into today's Gemara. So says the Gemara yesterday, we learned that according to Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, the word Beged is used to teach us Semer Upishtin, that any time it says Beged, it means Semer Upishtin. Based off of that piece of knowledge, says the Gemara, B'tana Dvei Rabbi Yishmael, Ta'im L'Kazir Rachmana Tzarem L'Rpishtin. So the reason, one second, let's get highlighting up and running. Here we go. Ta'im L'Kazir Rachmana Tzarem L'Rpishtin. The reason that we know that tzitzis can be shandis is because the Torah wrote the extra words, Tzemer Upishtin, which teaches us the smichos, which teaches us asay deicha lois asay, from the conjunction, the connection, the distance, the proximity between the mitzvah of tzitzis and the mitzvah of shanis teaches us asay of mitzvahs deicha lois asay, the negative commandment of shanis. But from there we learn out Allah if we did not have such a limud, kalayim b'tzitzis hava min adaser. The obvious implication is without the Torah teaching us, I would have assumed it is forbidden. Hava min adaser rachmana. I would have assumed it's forbidden. But ask the Gemara, why is that true? Why, according to Tana Rabbi Yishmael, would there have been a hava amina that it's answer? But the Torah says, you should make tzitzis in the corner of your garments. Anytime the word beged is used in the Torah, the word beged means emru bishtin. The Torah says avalut tcheles, and we know that on tzitzis you have to put on tcheles. Now, what is tcheles? Tcheles is blue what? Blue wool. Utcheles amru, and tcheles is wool. How do I know? We might tcheles amru. How do you know tcheles is wool? Who midishish kisna, from the word shish in the Torah when describing different garments of the kohen gadol. Shish is kisna's linen. Tcheles is imra. So therefore we know that tcheles must be wool. So from the fact that tcheles is wool, what do we see? We see very clearly that on tzitzis, you're putting on whatever the garment of tzitzis is, you're putting tcheles, you're putting wool. Now, what is the garment of tzitzis? The garment of tzitzis is a beged. According to Rabbi Yishmael, what does the word beged mean? Tzemeru bishtin. So what do we see very clearly, even without the smichos? Binehu bei, from within the Torah itself, it should be clear that the mitzvah of tzitzis overrides the prohibition of shanis, because we see you're putting wool on, semeru bishtin, wool on wool or linen. So we see there's obviously no isser of shanis by tzitzis. So why are we saying we need asay deicha lo isasay? We need the tzmichos of dinim ta'aselecha next to the mitzvah of tzitzis of semeru bishtin from the parsha itself. If the word beged, according to Yishmael, the word itself means semeru bishtin, then clearly tzitzis is allowed of amra, of wool, is allowed to go on semeru bishtin. Clearly, there's no isser of shanis. Answers the Gemara, Amru, Itzrich, no, we still need, why? We still need the fact that the Torah put them next door to each other. Because I would have thought like Rava, so we need this smichos to say not like Rava. What did Rava say? The Rava asked the following contradiction. Ksiv hakinaf. The Torah says by tzitzis you should put it al kanfei, on the corners of the garment. Min kinaf, from there we learn out that tzitzis has to be made of the same material as the kanaf, that the garment and the strands, the strings, are the same material. Uksiv, and it says Samru Bishtin, that what should the garment be made out of? Tzemer Ubishtin. So what do we see? Says Rava, Hakitzan, Tzemer upishtin paitim bein meminan bein shaloi meminan. Says Rava, if you're using Tzemer upishtin, if the strands, the strings themselves, if they are Tzemer upishtin, of course ours are Tzemer. If they're Tzemer upishtin, then what? Then they're paitrin that they work bein meminan bein shaloi meminan. You're allowed to put on any type of garment. Shar meaning, but if the strands are made out of other types of materials, then it only works on the type of garment itself. And Rava therefore learned that we would not necessarily know Shani, says the Gemara. Because according to Rava, the Tzemer Upishtin is only going to be put on any garment, on silk, etc., but not necessarily you can be able to put it on the opposite gender. The Tzemer on the Pishtin on the gender, on the Pishtin on the Tzemer, the wool on the linen, and the linen on the wool. So it says, Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, he had to come along and learn. No, we have the Tzvichos, the Torah puts the Tzemer Upishtin together with the Gedilim to tell us that even in Tzitzis, it has to be that way. Let's take one moment. I know it's getting late, but it's a very important concept. Let's take one moment to look at Rashi. And the reason why it's also, aside for the extreme importance of our Gemara, this is really the impetus of the famous machlokes, whether the garment of your tzitzis has to be wool or not. This is the machlokes between Rava and Tanvi Rabbi Yishmael, is this detail. Whether Rava says it could be made from any material, where Tanvi Yishmael is coming out, it has to only be Tzemer, and that's really machlokes Mechaber and Ramah. Ashkenazim and Tzvardim. Ashkenazim hold that it's a tafel of bracha to wear wool. Ramosha says it's more Meker Adin. The Tzvardim say it's much more Meker Adin. The Mechaber Paskins like the Tanvi Yishmael. Let's just see one Rashi. Rashi here says, Sal Gedei Dechamina. Rava, that he looks at Rachmana Tzemer Upishtin. I would have thought the Darshan Akanav min Kanaf like Rava to teach us what? Till beged Pishton, I say Pishton. Ulit Tzemer, I say Tzemer. Meaning, make the strands the same material as the beged, and then Vitzavi Tchiles, and then dye in wool. Avul Kalayim Loi. Rava holds it can't be Kalayim. Rava comes out two different opinions according to Rava. According to Rava, the garment can be made out of anything, and according to Rava, it has to be the same material. Kamash Drasha, this Muchan, the Afilu Klayim. The Milsa, the Rava says the Gemara, really, this is the end of our shtickle Torah. We don't need to know anything else, because now we know the necessity for the smuchin, but now we're going to continue darshaning in Rava. So this is really where we finished off yesterday. Now says the Gemara, V'altana B'Rei Yishmael, Leslie the Rava. Asks the Gemara, I don't understand. You just suggested that the entire limit of Tana B'Rei Yishmael, that Tana B'Rei Yishmael, even though they learned that the word beged means Tzemer Upishtin, they hold you need the smichos, you need the connection. The teachers are say, because if not, you would have thought that they all like Rava. Says the Gemara, but Tana B'Rei Yishmael, lastly the Rava. But Tana B'Rei Yishmael are at odds with Rava. They don't hold the same thing. They have a fundamental machlokes. The same machlokes that Tana B'Rei Yishmael holds that the word beged means Tzemer Upishtin, means by definition they don't hold like Rava. Because Rava holds that the beged can be made out of anything. Their old drush of kanaf min kanaf was that the beged is of anything. Where Tana B'Rei Yishmael holds the beged has to be dafko, specifically Tzemer Upishtin. So they're at odds to each other. So why would we need a limit to tell me Tana B'Rei Yishmael doesn't hold like Rava? Says the Gemara, no, it's true. It's true, Tana B'Rei Yishmael doesn't hold of the limit of Rava, but maybe they hold of the inference of the Rava. That what? Hakanav min kanav, that maybe Rabbi Yishmael would agree that even though the garment could be made specifically only of Tzemer Upishtin, but maybe the strands would have to be the same thing. And then dye it blue. Meaning it's true. Rabbi Yishmael does not hold of Rava. Rava holds that the garment has to be specifically of, Rava holds the garment can be made of any material. Rabbi Yishmael holds it has to be specifically wool or linen. But maybe the same mechanics of the drush, of the same lima, the same way of learning the Torah, Rabbi Yishmael would agree that the strands have to be the same material as the garment. Therefore, Kas Rachmana, tzemer u'pishtin, nafilu tzemer lepishtin, u'pishtin letzemer, that it's allowed to be made even tzemer for pishtin and pishtin for tzemer, and therefore each one is allowed, and therefore there is an allowance of shatnis. And therefore, says the Gemara, this is how we know, according to Tanakh Yishmael, that there's a din of asei doicha lois asei. Is that going to be the smichas that we just learned? So says the Gemara on the top of today's Amud. I know we're 10 minutes in, but Mirz Hashem, as you see, it's a smaller Amud Aleph and Amud Beis. Says the Gemara on the top line of Hey Amud Aleph, Teinach l'Tanakh Yishmael. Very good. You just taught me, according to Tanakh Yishmael, the word semer and the word pishton are extra. Let's remind ourselves. Why are the words extra? Because according to Tanakh Yishmael, the word beged, beis gimel dalit, equals semer pishton. So he learned that semer pishton and the Torah is extra because they were extra. He was able to learn on Asay de Chalaisa, say that even in the mitzvah of tzitzis of the Asay, that the mitzvah of tzitzis Asay would be doicha the lois Asay of shatnis. But ask the Gemara, l'Rabbanan minalu. What about, according to the Rabbanan, as we're going to see in a moment, the Rabbanan, actually we're not going to see in a moment, but Rashi over here points out, Rashi learns out that the word Tzemer Upishton is not extra. They learn that Tzemer Upishton is needed to teach us the definition of Shanis. That Shanis is Tzemer Upishton. So according to the Rabbanan, they don't have extra words in the Torah. If they don't have extra words in the Torah, where do they know the concept of Asei, Doicha Lois Asei? Answers the Gemara, Nafkalu Mi Roishai. We're going to have now 5 different stages trying to figure out what the limit is before we revert back to tzitzis. So number 1 is, let's learn out from a mitzayra. By a mitzayra it says you shave his roisha, his head. The Tanya learns in a raisa roisha matam alaymar. Why does it say roisha? Vishanemar, the Torah says lo sekivu es pasar sheicham, you should not shave your head. Shamei ani av mitzayra kain. You would have thought no one is allowed to shave their head, even on mitzayra. Tam alaymar, the first says the Torah. Roisha, the mitzayra specifically shaves his head. And therefore, we see the asay, the positive commandment of shaving a head, is doicha, pushes off the negative commandment of not being allowed to shave. Says the Gemara, Vika Tzavar, and it has to be the Haitana this Tana holds. Hakavas kol shma kafa. Has to be that even when you shave off all your head, that's called hakafa. That's a machlekes. Some hold that it's only cutting off the corners, the payas, and the corners of your head. But if you shave everything off, it's not called. It was included in the isser of shaving off your head. So this Tana holds that it is included in the isser, and we need the pasuk of Rosh to tell me you're allowed. So what do we see? We see asay doicha lois asay. Says the Gemara, no. I can ask you, it's not a lav that applies to everyone. It's a lav specifically that applies to men. There's no lav on women to shave their head. And therefore, says the Gemara, this cannot be a source for Asay Dechalis say to call Atayra Kula. Ella, says the Gemara, attempt number 2, Asya Mizikanai. We'll learn it out from the Isser to shave off your beard. Titania Zakanim Matamalemer. Why does the Torah say it's similar by Mitzayra to shave off his beard? Generally, there's an issue to shave off your beard. Shaimei Ani. From here we learn Av Koyin Mitzayra Kain. Even a Koyin Mitzayra would be included in the Isser to shave off his beard. Tamalemer Zikanoi. You teach me that no, when the Mitzayra Zakayin finishes tzara, finishes and purifies himself, he does shave off his beard. So we see the assay of shaving off the beard is deicha lo isasay. V'meino yini alav she'neshav bekol. And says we don't need it for this. Parasha Mitzayra again is a lav that's not equal to everyone. And we don't need it over here because we already know this din. Taneo in the lava shav bekol. And therefore we'll learn it to everywhere globally. Assay deicha lo isasay learned out from Zikana. Ask the Gemara 1 second. It's not true. We need the pasuk by a mitzayra, by a kayin mitzayra to shave off his beard. I would have thought shiny kayanim. Kayanim are different. Hayel the riba bem akaza mitzvah yizirus kayanim and many extra mitzvahs. So you would think afilu lav sheinu shava bekol loidachi. There would be a special havamina by kayanim that have extra mitzvahs. Maybe they cannot shave off their beard by a mitzayra. Maybe they have a special iser because they're within their own category. So kamash malan, we need a special pasuk didachi that even kohanim are daicha. So good. So we know that kohanim can shave off their beard when they finish their tzaras. But how do we know in general? Asay daicha lo say. Says the Gemara, you're right. Ala asya meiroshai. The Haftanya. Attempt number 3. Now we're going to Nazir. Let's learn out from Roishay of the following Tana. The Tana we learned in a Raisay lines with the bottom Roishay Matam. What does the Torah say? Roishay Levishan Emar. Ta'ar lo yaver el Roishay. You're not allowed to put a ta'ar. You're not allowed to put a razor on your head. Shameani. From here we learn out af mitzayra bin Nazir kain. Even a mitzayra and a Nazir is not allowed to put a razor on their head. Ta'amalay my Roishay. Here we say Roishai, they teach me that no, when a Nazir Mitzvah finishes, he shaves off his hair. Ask the Gemara again, we can ask, well, a Nazir Mitzvah Shkin B'She'ela. A Nazir Mitzvah is different. You're able to undo the Nazir. When someone makes a vow, an eder, to become a Nazir, he can undo it. He's Efshir B'She'ela. He could go to the Talmud Chacham and he could say, I didn't realize, I didn't mean, it was a mistake, etc. I didn't know the severity, etc. So it's Efshir B'She'ela. And therefore, that's the reason why maybe there's a leniency at the end of the day to shave off the head, but not necessarily would it teach it everywhere else. If you're not going to say the following, says the Gemara, you have to agree with me that a Nazir is in a separate category. You know why? Because if you don't say that, we know the rule is, until we've been trying to figure out the past few days, that I say a positive commandment pushes off a negative commandment. I say, but we know that I say is not and I say. But if you were able to learn out from Nazir, if Nazir was not special, then Ligmar mi Nazir. We should learn out from Nazir that Asay is Doichel Loisa say Ve'asay. From the fact that we know that it's not true. Elami Nazir Maitem Eloi Gamrin. So why don't we learn out from Nazir? Why is it Nazir a perfect source that Asay is Doichel Loisa say Ve'asay? You know why? That's the reason, because Nazir is different, because you're able to be Shayalib to undo your Naziros. And therefore we cannot learn from Nazir. So 4 different attempts, actually 3 different attempts to figure out the source. Why, according to the Rabbanan, is Asay, Deicha Loisa say? Why do we need the pasuk of Aleho by Yibam to teach me that in the case of Arayas you're not allowed to do Yibam? Says the Gemara, Elala'ilam, we have to say, turning over to Heya Mebeis, Mikra Kamo, let's go back to the original source. Let's go back to the pasuk of Titis. Let's go back to the pasuk of Shanis, and that's the same source that Tanadir Yishmael learned out. The Rabbanan would also. What was the problem? The problem was that according to the Rabbanan, the word Samer Upishtin was not extra. It was only extra according to Rabbi Yishmael. Because according to Rabbi Yishmael, the word Beged equals Samer Upishtin. But according to the Rabbanan, the word is not extra. Says the Gemara, but it is extra. What's extra? The Torah should have said, create tzitzis. Gedilim lamali. What's this word gedilim? This word offshoots. This word growths. Shemami nolaf. We see the word is extra. From the extra of that word, that's what we're going to learn out. Asay doicha loisa say. Ask the Gemara, slow down. The word gedilim is not extra at all. We need that word to teach me. This year, teach me the number of threads, the number of strings you need for tzitzis. As we see in a Brisa, Gadil. The Torah just said Gadil would be Shnayim, would be 2 strands. Gadilim is Arba. And from here we learn that I say Gadil, Baslim, Itaichai. So this is where we learn the source that our tzitzis are 4 strings. We'll point out, obviously, they look like 8. They're doubled over, 4 and 4. So says the Gemara, you're right, but in Kain Le Makra, you know what the Torah could have said? Loi Silbash Shatnez. Semeru Pishtin Yachtov Lamali. So a new source. Why is the word Yachtov doing there? It could have said, don't wear Shadis. Why did the Torah have to continue? And right, Semeru Pishtin Yachtov Lamali. Shmami no Laf Nuyeh. So the word Yachtov is extra, and that teaches me that you could say, I say, say, by Tintis and similarly by everywhere else. Ask the Gemara further, 5 lines down. It's not extra. And again, let's remind yourself all the way back 2 days ago. What we're looking for is muf. Now we're looking for a pasuk that's extra. So we're looking that in Devarim that we're going to darshin. I say from the smichos, from the proximity, because it's mufna, that even though according to the shitas of Yehuda, then in Kol HaTarakula we don't darshan smichos, but over here we do. Says the Gemara Vakatim Ba'ilei, we need the pasuk of Yachtov L'toikev Shtei Tkifos, that if you sow 2 stitches. Chibur, that's considered an attachment. What is the forbiddance of shanis? What is the midarais, the minatayr, the biblical isser of putting together different materials? It's only if you're taik, if you make a yachtav. What's yachtav? Yachtav is you make a double stitch. Utkifa achas einoy chibur. That's what we learn out from the word yachtav. So the word is not extra. Teaches us a fundamental din, what's called a connection with regard to shanis. Says the Gemara in Kein Lichtav Rachman Loy Silbas Semer Upishtin Yachtav. The Torah could have just said, do not wear Semer Upishtin Yachtav. And that would have taught me that Yachtav together, 2 stitches of Semer Upishtin is not allowed. Shatnei Islamali, the word Shatnei is, what is that word doing there? Shema Minolaf, that word is extra and that word is teaching me. Ask the Gemara 1 second, it's not extra. The word shanes is a conjunction of 3 words. Shaveh, taveh, v'nois. The words teaching me that it has to be smooth, spun, and woven. That the only time that the deraisa is of shanes is if the materials are spun and put together as one. So says the Gemara, the word shanes itself is not extra. Answers the Gemara, no. Alakula meishanes nafka. Really, it could both be learned out from that word. Because the Torah could have just said shaveh, taveh, v'nois. Why did it put it into a conjunction of one word called shanis? It teaches me, A, the materials have to be spun, woven, and thread together, but B, the word itself is extra to teach me asay, deichalois asay. And therefore, says the Gemara, that is how we're going to know why by Yibum we need a special word, aleha, to teach me that by Yibum, by Arayas, you're not allowed to do Yibum. Why do we need the Torah to teach me that? Because I would have thought it was Deicha. Why would it have been Deicha? Because we see a source, according to Rabbi Yehuda and Devarim, that's Mufna, that is extra. The word Shan is to teach me Asay, Deicha, Lois Asay. Says the Gemara, Ashkechan, very, very nice. Asay, Asay, Deicha, Lois Asay, Gereda. Perfect. We got there. We have one limit according to Tanvir Ishmael. We have another limit according to the Rabbanan, that what? Asay is Deicha, Lois Asay. But I asked the Gemara, which is really what we were looking for to start off with. But what's the source? Didachi. Where's the source? Which of course is the case of Arayas, that there's karis. So where do we know that from? Answers the Gemara, Misri, and therefore we need a letter to come and answer. And maybe you'll suggest, and here we go. Now we start figuring out where do we know maybe you're going to suggest Mimila. Learn out from Bris Mila Ma'amila excuse me. We can learn out from Mila that Mila is an Leisa Seish Bakaris. And the Asay is Daichit. So you see Asay Daich Leisa say Sheyesh Bakaris. Says the Gemara, you can learn out from Mila. Mila is special. Mila was said over with was a very strong severity. There were 13 brisais that were sealed with Mila. So maybe that's the reason why the Asay of Mila is Daiche. Says the Gemara, okay, we'll learn it from Pesach. Says the Gemara, you can't learn it from Karban Pesach. Why not? That Rashi points out that the Shechita of the Karban Pesach is Daiche Shabbos. Mala Pesach Shekin Karis Shekin Karis. Pesach is different in that the positive commandment has karis to it as well. It's not just an asay deicha lois asay sheyish bakaris. Meaning Shabbos is a lois asay sheyish bakaris, but the asay of Karban Pesach itself has karis as well. So you can't use that as your source. We're looking for a source that in general, say a positive commandment pushes off a negative commandment that has karis, but you can't learn that from Karban Pesach because in itself the asay is an asay that if you're mavat, if you don't do it, you get karis as well. Says the Gemara, number 3, mitamid. Let's learn now from the daily tamid, which as well overrides Shabbos. Says the Gemara again, malatamish kein tadir. Maybe you can't learn that from Talmud because it's Tadir, it applies all over. So the answer is the Gemara, you're right. We have 3 attempts, Mila Shabbos, Talmud. Any singular one cannot teach me the klal of a say say. But teisi mitarti. Why do we learn out from 2? Let's take 2 of them, either Shabbos and Mila and Talmud, and let's learn out from 2 of them to teach us a say shish bakaris. May teisi says the Gemara, which 2? May Milo Pesach. You want to learn it out from Mila and Karban Pesach, Shekain Karis. You can't do that because they both are assays that have kares. Pesach v'tamid, you also can't learn out from. Shkin tzarech gavaya, they're karbanos, they're at a higher pedestal. Mimila v'tamid, you can't learn out. Shkin yeshel v'nei adiber. These were entities that existed before Matan Torah. And of course, v'aliba demand damar, oilu shekivi yisaba midbar, lest tamid avoy. A Gemara we learned very recently in the big machlekes, what was the carbon oila that Klal Yisrael brought before Matan Torah? Was it a tamid or not? This is, of course, or is it a chagiga? This is going according to the opinion that holds it was a tamid. But we see that any combination of two of these three, of Mila, Tamid, and Pesach, cannot work because they have their own severity and therefore would not allow us to learn everywhere else. Umikulu nami, and you also can't learn out from all three. Why not? All three of them existed before Matan Torah. So says the Gemara, we're up the creek. What is the source? Asay, the Chalois Asay, Sheyesh Abba Karis. Answers the Gemara, 7 lines to the bottom. The first line is Yeshnon, Ele Itzrech. You know why we need the pasuk of Aleh? You know why we need to have a special exclusion that there's no Yibon, Sakadai, Chamina, Tizi, Mikibar Avaim. I would have thought that maybe just like Kibbut Avaim, the Tanya learned in the Rice, Yochle Kibbut Avaim, Doich Shabbos. Your parent tells you to do something on Shabbos, you would think they win. They have a mitzvah daraisa to listen to your parents. One of the Aseres Adibros says the Gemara, Tambulaymer, Ish Aimoy Va'aviv Tirau, Veshav Sasai Tishmaru. You have to fear your father and mother, and you have to guard Shabbos. From there we learn out not like the Havam. You would have thought your parents tell you to do something on Shabbos, that's a violation of Shabbos, you should listen to your parents. Says the Torah, no. Kul chel chayavim b'chvaydi, you're all obligated in my honor. And therefore, my laugh, what's the case? The Amar leish chayli b'shali. The parent says, shecht me an animal, cook for me something, which is what? Which is a leisa sheyesh ba kares. And yet, there would have been a hava amina to listen to the parent. Why is there a hava amina to listen to the parent? Must be because the asay, the positive commandment of kibbut avaim, would push away the negative commandment, the leisa asay of cooking or shechting on Shabbos sheyesh ba kares. The time of the kasav rachmana shabsai say deshmayru, and the only reason why you don't listen to your parents is because of the special pasuk. Halav hachi dachi. If not for the pasuk, would be deichan. That's our source. The source that I say sheyesh bakaris comes from kibbut avaim, from the fact that the Torah had to go out of its way and write the Shiva of the Vimai Tiro v'Shavsai Tishmaru teaches me. If not for that, I would have thought I say sheyesh bakaris. Answers the Gemara, loy, that is not a good source. If we turn over to tomorrow's Daf, Vavam and Aleph, Lav de mechamer. It's not talking about then I say aloisa sheyesh bakares of bashal or shchita. So about the lav of mechaber, the parent tells you to lead an animal on Shabbos. Leading an animal on Shabbos is aloisa say without kares, and that's when we need a pasuk of eskibad avaim and shabsoi say tishmaru. That's where we need a special pasuk, but we do not necessarily know that there would have been a hava mina say de aloisa say sheyesh bakares. And we're going to pick it up from over here, Mirza Hashem, tomorrow, as we'll continue looking for the source of Asei Dechaloisa Sei Sheyesh Ba Karis.